Looking back, it's all so clear. I guess I should have been suspicious when Olivia came home from the gallery gushing about her new client. But when you completely trust someone and she hasn't given you a reason to doubt her in 17 years, you give her the benefit of the doubt. I was wrong, dead wrong. My name's Ethan and my wife Olivia, and I met at State College 18 years ago, started dating 17 years ago, and got hitched 16 years ago. We had our daughter, Mia, 14 years ago, and our son, Tyler, 12 years ago. I'm a web developer for a state agency. I make decent money, but we're not rich. I was successful enough that Olivia could be a stay-at-home mom when the kids were little, but 2 years ago, she decided they were old enough for her to spread her wings. She found a part-time job, 30 hours a week, as a curator at a prestigious art gallery downtown. She'd studied art history in college, so she was more than qualified. The Canvas Gallery catered to a clientele with a bit more disposable income than we had. We live in a big city in the Great Lakes region, and there are a lot of affluent folks who keep the gallery in business. As a bonus, Olivia got to rub elbows with these people through her work, getting a glimpse into their world before coming home to our everyday life. Occasionally, we both got to experience that world, like when the gallery hosted a big opening and I'd tag along as her plus one. I have to admit, spending a few hours with movers and shakers was exciting. As a tech guy, I'm usually dealing with other techies, so it was a nice change of pace. Every now and then, Olivia would come home buzzing about meeting some celebrity or VIP. The kids and I would humor her, watching her practically float around the house for a while, until reality set in, and she remembered where she fit in the grand scheme of things. Unfortunately, dealing with disappointment wasn't Olivia's strong suit. The kids usually scattered to their rooms, often leaving me to bear the brunt of her snide remarks about our life. Most of the time, I just let it roll off my back and went to tinker with my car in the garage. A few weeks earlier, Olivia had been going on and on about some real estate hotshot who'd become a regular at the gallery. Hunter, a 28-year-old millionaire who'd recently moved into a pricey new place and wanted artwork that reflected his status. She seemed smitten with him, although she mentioned he was a bit full of himself. In various conversations, she dropped comments about how attractive and complex he was, and how he was always talking about cycling or rock climbing. Olivia's gushing about patrons wasn't out of the ordinary, so I didn't think much of it and just let her chatter on. As expected, after a couple of weeks, it died down, and I didn't hear another word about Hunter, until I was introduced to him at the gallery's Christmas gala a few weeks later. I had to admit, he cut an impressive figure. About 6'2", 190 pounds, he looked every bit the successful businessman in his tailored Armani suit. He was also blonde, blue-eyed, and incredibly handsome, even to my jaded eyes. I hadn't quite expected that. I chatted with him for maybe 30 seconds while Olivia introduced us, and in that brief exchange, I caught him checking her out from head to toe. Don't get me wrong, she looked stunning that night in a blue skirt suit with a peak of cleavage from her white silk blouse. But his gaze was more predatory than appreciative. Olivia seemed too caught up in the festivities to notice, but I was definitely paying attention. He was practically undressing her with his eyes. Olivia, oblivious, went off to mingle, and I headed to the bar. I poured myself a Jack and Coke and found Mark Wilson, the husband of one of her colleagues. We'd met a few times before and always got along well. We talked sports and cars for a while, then he went to chat with someone else. About an hour later, I spotted Olivia talking to a small group, Hunter practically draped all over her. I went back to the bar, grabbed her a glass of her favorite Pinot Grigio, and strode over. I introduced myself, handed Olivia her drink, then casually reached over and removed Hunter's hand, which had somehow found its way to her thigh. He didn't say anything, just flashed me a smug grin and pulled his hand back. I chatted with the group for a few minutes, then Olivia wandered off to talk to someone else, and I went in another direction, making sure Hunter wasn't following her. I figured I'd catch up with her later while she was doing her rounds, but after an hour, she was nowhere to be found. I scanned the room again. No Hunter either. My spidey senses were on high alert, so I set out to find her. She wasn't inside, so I headed out the front door and started circling the building. There were a few small groups of people in coats saying their goodbyes, but still no sign of Olivia. And then I saw them, getting cozy in the back seat of a black Jaguar XJ. The engine was running. I didn't need to check if it was Olivia and Hunter. I knew it was. I marched over and yanked open the passenger door. Whoever was in there shot up in surprise. They weren't quite kissing, but they were close. "Time to go, honey. Now," I said, my voice polite but firm. We were just..." Olivia stammered while Hunter just smirked at me. "Don't care. Time to go," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "But Ethan, you have to come listen to this sound system," Olivia insisted. "Hunter says it's absolutely amazing." Some orchestral music was playing, but I doubt either of them had heard a note. "Another time, Hunter. We really need to go," I said, my voice dripping with disdain. I practically dragged Olivia out of the car and over to where my F-150 was parked. "Wait, I can't leave yet," she protested. "The party's going for another 2 hours. I'm supposed to stay and be the hostess with the mostest. If your boss has a problem with it, he can call me directly," I said. "And what the hell were you thinking? You weren't listening to the sound system." "But it is amazing," she said, a nervous tremor in her voice. "Yeah, right," I replied, not bothering to hide my disbelief. Olivia kept up the innocent act, but the next couple of weeks were tense between us. Eventually, things settled back into a semblance of normalcy, or so I thought. A few months later, Olivia dropped a bombshell. She'd accepted an invitation to Hunter's lakeside cabin for 4th of July weekend. It was going to be us, her boss David and his wife Susan, and 2 other couples who were friends with Hunter. We'd drive up Friday afternoon and stay until Sunday afternoon, and Hunter was going to do all the cooking, plus he had a fully stocked bar. I started to protest, but Olivia cut me off. "We're doing this," she said simply, turning on her heel and leaving me speechless. Truthfully, the weekend started out great. We spent a few hours out on the lake on Hunter's sailboat, which was surprisingly big. All the women looked fantastic in their bikinis, and the guys didn't look too shabby in their swim trunks either. Hunter definitely had the best physique of the bunch, though thankfully, he didn't seem to flaunt it. Olivia, despite being the second oldest of the 5 women, still had it going on. I caught myself admiring her in her black bikini. It showed off her curves without being too revealing. Back at the cabin, Hunter had a top-of-the-line grill set up and a fridge fully stocked with beer, wine, and mixers. He'd brought marinated steaks, and the smell of them cooking on the grill filled the air as we relaxed with our drinks. Hunter played the perfect host, all the while being extra attentive to Olivia, who seemed to be clinging to him even more than she had at the Christmas party. The night went off without a hitch, and by midnight, everyone had turned in for the night. Hunter, being the lone bachelor, had the master suite to himself. Saturday started with a trip to a nearby town, a cute little tourist trap with all sorts of quaint shops. Most of the women came back with bags full of souvenirs. We grabbed a late lunch of hero sandwiches before breaking out the volleyball net. The drinks flowed freely as the afternoon wore on, and by evening, the grill was fired up again, this time with sausages and pulled pork. We were enjoying another delicious meal, when David suggested he and I take a walk around the lake to walk off all the food and booze. Considering how much we'd all been eating and drinking, I thought it was a great idea. It took us a good 30 minutes to circle the lake, and when we got back, everyone had moved from the picnic table to the lounge chairs. I wasn't exactly thrilled to see Olivia draped over Hunter's lap, his hands on her waist. She smiled and got up as we approached, but didn't seem to be in any hurry, even though she knew I wouldn't be pleased. She avoided eye contact with me, sitting down in the chair next to mine. Throughout the rest of the evening, I caught her exchanging glances with Hunter whenever they thought I wasn't looking. Just like the night before, people started heading to bed around midnight. But as the other couples wandered off to their rooms, Olivia quietly asked me to join her in the kitchen. Once we were alone, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Hunter asked me to sleep with him tonight." I said yes. I must have blacked out or something because I thought I'd misheard her. "You're what?" She realized I hadn't misunderstood. "It's not about love, Ethan. It's just sex," she said. I've been completely faithful to you for 17 years. You're the only man I love. But I want to have sex with Hunter. He turns me on, and I want to see what it's like with another man. After tonight, I'll go back to being your faithful wife, but I think I'm owed this one night. I don't know how long I stood there with my mouth hanging open. My wife had just told me she was going to sleep with another man because she wanted to, and I owed it to her. You're sleeping with him over my dead body, I finally sputtered. This isn't up for negotiation, Ethan. Just accept it, she said coldly. Tonight I'm his. Tomorrow and for the rest of my life, I'll be yours. Don't be so sure about that, sweetheart. Remember, every action has consequences. God, Ethan, she hissed. Do you always have to see everything in black and white? It's one night. Just one, and you're going to ruin everything over it? One night. We never thought you'd be so difficult about it. Honestly, I should have just kept quiet and done it behind your back, but I was afraid that if you found out, it really would be over. I thought if you knew and let me, it wouldn't be betrayal. She turned and walked away. As I stepped out of the kitchen, I saw her take Hunter's hand and lead him toward the master suite. I think my vision blurred. I must have gotten something in my eye. This isn't up for negotiation, Ethan. Accept it. Tonight I'm his. Tomorrow, and for the rest of my life, I'll be yours. Don't be so sure about that, babe. Remember, every action has consequences. God, Ethan, she hissed. Do you really have to see everything in black and white? It's one night. Just one. And you're going to ruin everything over it? We never thought you'd be so stubborn about it. Honestly, I should have just kept my mouth shut and done it behind your back. But I was afraid that if you found out, it really would be over. So I thought if you knew and let me go, it wouldn't be real betrayal. She spun around and walked away. As I stepped out of the kitchen, I saw her take Hunter's hand and lead him towards the master suite. I think my vision blurred. I must have gotten something in my eye. I went to the wet bar and poured myself a stiff shot of whiskey. It took about 5 minutes to down it. Then I found myself standing outside the master bedroom door, listening to the sounds of my wife with another man. My life, as I knew it, was over. I drank a few more shots, trying to figure out what to do. My first instinct was to walk out right then and file for divorce. But the thought of leaving my kids, of putting them through that, stopped me cold. I couldn't see that being good for them, or me. But how could I stay? My wife was in the next room, in bed with another man. I couldn't stomach it. I briefly considered burning the house down with all of us in it, but sanity prevailed. The next thing I knew, it was 3 a.m., and the house was quiet. I stumbled to the guest room. The bed was still made. Olivia hadn't even bothered to sleep there. I collapsed on top of the covers and dozed fitfully for a few hours. I woke up at 7:30 and went through the motions of getting ready for the day. The other 3 couples were already up and having breakfast when I dragged myself into the kitchen. Susan, David's wife, was apparently the head chef of the group, and she offered me a plate of bacon and eggs. The others mumbled good mornings. Everyone was stealing glances at me, their eyes full of pity and thinly veiled amusement. I felt my face flush. The humiliation was unbearable. It's okay, Ethan. We've all been there, Susan said sympathetically, while the others nodded in agreement. Hunter's done this 3 or 4 times. He's an alpha male. When he sees what he wants, he goes for it. He's hardwired that way, Chris added. I'm also inclined to think he gets off on the humiliation aspect, and I think the women are into that too, David chimed in. But I don't think it's personal. He is what he is, Susan said. So, what happened to the other couples he did this with? I asked. As far as I know, they're all still married. Seems silly to throw away a long marriage over one night, you know? Susan replied. Especially when there are kids involved, Emily added. You mean he's trolling for married women with kids so the wives can use the kids as leverage? I asked incredulously. Sounds about right, Chris said. He's actually a really good guy, except for that one quirk, Ralph, Emily's husband, jumped in. I've known him since college, and if you're his friend, you've got a friend for life. So I can forgive him the one flaw, especially since it doesn't seem to hurt the marriages in the long run. In fact, I heard Hunter hooked his last conquest up with a sweet condo in North Carolina last year. Hunter stays there when he's in town. Just then, we started to hear sounds coming from the master suite. It was Olivia, and from the sounds of it, round two with Hunter. Everyone at the table turned beet red except me. I felt my blood run cold. "Why don't we take the rest of breakfast out on the deck?" Susan suggested quickly. Apparently, Hunter set his last girlfriend up with a sweet condo in North Carolina last year. He uses it as a crash pad when he's in town. Just then, we started to hear moans coming from the master suite. It was Olivia, and from the sounds of it, round two with Hunter. Everyone at the table turned beet red with embarrassment, while I saw red with rage. "Why don't we take the rest of breakfast out on the deck?" Susan suggested quickly. About 30 minutes later, Hunter and Olivia joined us. They were freshly showered and looking very pleased with themselves. Olivia was practically glowing, making no effort to hide what had transpired. She had a plate of food in her hand and headed straight for the chaise lounge where I was sitting. I moved my legs to let her pass. She didn't say a word, just gave me a curt nod as she sat down. Even from behind, I could see the hickey on her shoulder, just below the strap of her tank top. "So, what's on everyone's agenda for today?" Hunter asked cheerfully, already slipping back into the role of host. "I think we need to head back and give the kids some attention this afternoon. Don't you, honey?" I said, directing my words at Olivia's back. She hesitated, and though I couldn't see her face, I could tell she was rolling her eyes. It was one of those things you just know after being with someone for as long as we had. She was facing the others, so they all saw it too, and it took everything I had not to reach over and smack her. "I was hoping we could stick around a little longer. Maybe go for another swim," she said sweetly. "Nope, we're heading back. Finish your breakfast. I'll load up the car. We're leaving by 10, I said, getting up and heading inside. I loaded the car in record time. By the time I got back to the deck, Olivia was just finishing up. I grabbed her by the wrist, gave a quick wave goodbye to the others, and practically dragged her to the car. I didn't need to see their faces to know what they were thinking. I was already thinking it myself. With the exception of the radio, we drove in silence for the first 45 minutes. Olivia kept her eyes glued to the passenger window. I figured she was afraid if she looked at me, I'd blow up. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Was it worth it?" I asked, my voice tight with anger. She didn't move for a moment. Then, slowly, she turned to face me. "Yes," she said quietly. "It was amazing." Her answer wasn't what I was expecting. I don't know what I'd been expecting, but it wasn't the cold, hard truth. Maybe some stammering, a few half-truths, a sliver of regret. But the look on her face told me she meant every word. 17 years, 2 kids, everything we've built together, gone. In one night? I asked. She turned back to the window, a sad, almost defeated expression on her face. "That depends on you, Ethan," she said. "Like I promised, it was only once. I'll be yours again, just as devoted as before. Last night was incredible, but it's over. Now if you can find it in your heart to forgive me, we can move on. But if you're going to throw away our family so easily, do what you have to do. But just know, I will take the kids, and they'll know it was you who destroyed our family." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. No apology. In fact, she was going to blame me for ruining everything. She and Hunter must have planned this out, carefully crafting the perfect humiliation. No apology. She was actually going to blame me for ruining everything. She and Hunter had planned this whole thing. I was sure of it, carefully crafting my humiliation. I'd never seen this side of Olivia before, and I definitely didn't like it. That morning's performance with Hunter had clearly been another calculated move. He didn't even try to apologize? Did he at least want me to watch before he went back to being your devoted husband? I asked, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "He's fine with whatever my rules are," she said flatly. We stopped at her parents' house to pick up the kids. I've always gotten along well with Olivia's parents, George and Linda, but now I could barely look them in the eye. I felt like they somehow knew Olivia had cheated, and it filled me with shame. I wanted to scream the truth about their precious daughter, but I knew it wasn't the time or place. Olivia seemed to relish in my discomfort. This was definitely not the way to make amends. Later that night, as we lay in bed, Olivia snuggled up to me. I turned away from her, but she just pressed closer and started kissing my neck. Her hand slid down my body, and before I knew it, she was touching me, trying to arouse me. I pulled away. No, I said, my voice shaking. This isn't happening tonight. You don't get to do that, and then expect me to just be okay with it. Be happy with whatever the hell Hunter gave you last night and this morning. For the first time since Saturday night, I saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. She looked shocked that I'd rejected her advances. Don't you want your wife back? She asked, her voice small. Hunter said most men would be begging for this. Oh, did he now? I spat. So he's not just a real estate genius, he's an expert on men too? Well, maybe he should stick to what he knows, because some men don't see what you did as a challenge. Some of us see it as a betrayal. Olivia's eyes widened. I'd never spoken to her like this before, never cursed at her. She pulled away and rolled over, facing away from me. I could hear her softly crying, but I didn't care. The following week, I scheduled a consultation with a well-respected divorce lawyer. The meeting, to put it mildly, was eye-opening. Jonathan Miller, the lawyer, had to explain my options twice. Basically, I could either give up half my stuff and my kids, or I could wait, for the sake of the kids, and then give up half my stuff. Most couples who stay together for the children end up getting divorced anyway, once the kids are grown, he explained. They've lived their lives through their kids, and then when the kids are gone, they realize they have nothing in common. So, that was the plan. Suck it up for the next 6 years until Tyler graduated high school, then file for divorce. At least I wouldn't have to worry about Olivia running off with someone else. She had, after all, promised to be faithful. And that's what I did. I focused on my kids. I was there for every school event, every fundraiser, every awkward father-daughter dance. And I made sure Olivia participated too. Why should I be the only one suffering through PTA meetings and 4-hour woodworking projects? As for the physical side of our relationship, I didn't touch her for 6 months. 6 very long months. Finally, she told me that if I didn't want to be with her in that way, she'd have to leave. Since I wasn't quite ready to perform a self-vasectomy, I managed to convince myself that I could have sex with Olivia the same way she'd had sex with Hunter, as a purely physical act, nothing more. She was still a beautiful woman, after all, and at least I wasn't sleeping with the enemy. It wasn't enjoyable, but our first night back in the saddle set the tone for the next few years. We had a date night at Bellinate, our favorite Italian place, and I plied her with a couple extra glasses of Pinot Grigio. Where the hell did that come from? She whispered, as I practically ripped her clothes off when we got home. Guess you'll have to wait another 6 months to find out, I muttered, pressing myself against her. The truth was, every time I thought about Olivia with Hunter, I saw red. There was nothing tender about our lovemaking anymore. No love, just raw lust. She seemed to enjoy it, never complained, though we rarely touched or talked the way we used to. I tried to convince myself this was the new normal, but I was kidding myself. To quiet the doubts that gnawed at me, I hired a private investigator to follow Olivia once a month, just to be sure she was keeping her word. Peace of mind, even if it cost a fortune. 6 years passed. Tyler was accepted to the University of Michigan. Maya was already studying there. They'd been waging a sibling war all summer, dreading the day they'd both be gone. Tyler was only a freshman, so he'd be living in the dorms, and Olivia and I were helping him move in the week before classes started. As I was unpacking the last box, it hit me. You kept your promise, I said to Olivia. About? She asked. 16 years ago, you made a vow to me, and you threw it away that night. I told you not to do it, but you did it anyway, and then you threatened to take the kids. You had me served with divorce papers at the gallery, in front of David and all your coworkers. Could you have been any crueler? I felt like David had closed the loop you started at that stupid lake house 6 years ago, I continued. And as far as cruelty goes, your little performance in the bedroom that Sunday morning, with the rest of us in the house, that was the single most humiliating moment of my life. I'm betting this is me getting even. Olivia was sobbing now, but I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. 6 years ago, you told me you thought that night with Hunter was worth it, that it was amazing. Do you still feel the same? I kept my promise to you, she whispered. I've been faithful. How very noble of you, I scoffed. So, your vow was only good for 16 years? Does that mean your promise was only valid for half that time, say 8 years? Ethan, I'm truly sorry if this is going to lead to divorce, but I told you, I didn't cheat. Yes, you did. Just because I told you ahead of time, instead of sneaking around, doesn't make it right. We didn't discuss it, you and he did. We didn't agree to it, you and he did. And then you broke your vows to me. You regret getting caught, but you don't regret what you did. You never have. I didn't give you a free pass. We didn't have some agreement that you could just do whatever you wanted. You took it and decided I had to accept it. You ripped my heart out that weekend, Olivia. And on the drive home, you told me it was my problem, that I had to get over it or you'd take the kids. That sounds a hell of a lot like love to me. It sure as hell doesn't to me. Olivia just stared at me, completely speechless. Olivia lawyered up, and her lawyer somehow convinced the judge that we needed couples counseling. At the first session, the therapist, a perky woman in her early 30s, asked me why I couldn't seem to get over Olivia's one-time infidelity, especially since she hadn't gone behind my back or tried to hide anything from me. I stared at her like she had two heads. Have you ever been married? I asked, noticing the bare ring finger on her left hand. My marital status is irrelevant, Mr. Sprague, she said defensively. That's exactly the wrong answer, I said, getting to my feet. I left them both sitting there, speechless. That evening, I got a call from George and Linda. I loved them dearly. My own parents had passed away years ago, and we'd grown even closer since then. They'd always been good to me, but I knew they'd have to side with their daughter. That's what parents do. I hadn't spoken to them since before Olivia served me with the divorce papers. Now, they were both on speakerphone. After a few pleasantries, Linda cut to the chase. Ethan, why do you have to be so difficult about this? You know Olivia loves you with all her heart, and she's kept her promise. She hasn't been with another man. Why can't you just move on? What exactly did she tell you about that weekend? I asked. Honey, she told us you two had a conversation about her being with another man once, and that she promised she would never do it again. She told us what she told you, that she could have gone behind your back, but she didn't because she loves you and doesn't want to lose you. That's about half the story, Mom, I said. Were you two there that night? Because you seem to be leaving out a few key details. We're sitting right here. Say what you have to say, Ethan, George said gruffly. We didn't have a conversation about her sleeping with Hunter. She and Hunter decided that. And when I told her she was crossing a line, that I wasn't okay with it, she threatened to take the kids. Do you know how that felt? I couldn't let her do that. And then she has the nerve to serve me at the gallery in front of David and all her coworkers. And then I paused, the memory still raw. And then, the next morning, they did it again, and the rest of you just sat around, pretending not to hear anything until my wife got a little too loud. So we all moved outside. I have never felt so humiliated in my entire life. And then on the drive home, she has the nerve to tell me how great the sex was. Does that sound like a loving wife? Does that sound like someone who gives a damn about her husband? That's not what happened, Ethan, Linda protested. But you lived with her for another 6 years, George said. No, I lived with my kids for 6 years. And yeah, after a while, I even let Olivia back in my bed. But the love died that night, and it's been dying a little more every day since. I'll never love her the way I did. I could hear Linda crying softly. I'm sorry, son, George said. We didn't know the whole story. We should have known better than to assume. Thank you for staying for the kids. Olivia and her lawyer dragged out the divorce proceedings for over a year. I don't know if she thought I'd lose my nerve and change my mind, but it wasn't happening. Though I hadn't realized it at the time, being an involved parent had actually expanded my social circle. I knew far more divorced dads than I ever thought possible, and I used their experiences to my advantage. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt free. I started going out on dates, taking day trips, hitting up clubs on the weekends. And you know what? I met a lot of interesting women, many of them divorced moms from my kids' social circles, or friends of friends. Turns out, the old adage is true. There are plenty of fish in the sea. For the first time in years, I felt alive. I moved into a 3-bedroom condo after the divorce. I wanted the kids to have a place to stay with me whenever they wanted. I knew they were angry with Olivia, and I figured they'd come around eventually, maybe split their time between us. I just wanted them to be happy. For their sake, I hoped Olivia and I could figure out an amicable way to co-parent, but I wasn't going to make it easy for her. She'd hurt all three of us, and I wasn't about to help her worm her way back into our lives. Unsurprisingly, both kids chose to spend their college breaks at my place. What did surprise me was how quickly Olivia's parents came back into the fold. I hadn't heard much from them during the divorce, which I completely understood, but a couple of months after it was finalized, Linda called. She wanted to know if I'd meet her and George for dinner at Vincenzo's. Considering how well we'd always gotten along, I saw no reason to refuse. The evening got off to a rocky start. They both apologized profusely for Olivia's behavior and any animosity caused by their unwavering support of her, at least until they got the full story. I told them I understood, that they were just being good parents. Then I suggested we change the subject, and the evening picked up from there. Despite the occasional wistful comment, a few tears shed for what might have been, it felt good to have George and Linda back in my life. It felt normal. We rarely mentioned Olivia, except when reminiscing about some shared event from the past. We started getting together for dinner a couple of times a month while the kids were away at school, even more often when they were home. It was only a matter of time before a sixth person joined our little gatherings. I met Sophia about 18 months after the divorce. I was casually dating, not really looking for anything serious, when she and a few of her friends walked into the Oak and Barrel, where the kids and I were having dinner. I didn't pay much attention to them until Mia kicked me under the table. "Dad, you see those women who just sat down?" she asked. "They all look amazing, and 3 of them aren't wearing wedding rings." "Jesus, Mia, I don't need you to be my wingman," I said. "He's right, Dad. There's some serious potential at that table," Tyler added. I glanced over. My kids weren't wrong. "Okay, maybe I do need a wingman," I said to Mia. We finished up our meal. Since I'd driven, I tossed Mia the car keys. "I'll grab an Uber," I told the kids. Then I walked over to the table of beautiful women and introduced myself. They quickly invited me to join them. "You just ditched your kids to flirt with us? What kind of father does that?" asked Ashley, a stunning blonde with long, flowing hair, who was seated at 10 o'clock. "I'm the kind of father who knows his kids have great taste," I replied with a wink. And when they pointed out that 3 of you weren't wearing wedding rings, I had 2 options. Go home, watch baseball, and get an earful from these 2, or come over here and maybe make a complete ass of myself. But at least I'd get some respect from the peanut gallery. And besides, they've always said a beautiful stepmom is just as easy to love as an ugly one. "Wow, you've got this whole thing figured out, big guy," said Jessica, the attractive brunette sitting at 2 o'clock. "Not a jerk, just a confident guy with 2 smart, talkative kids," Ashley quipped. "And great taste, might I add." "So are you the teacher here?" one of them asked, and they all burst out laughing, even Chloe, the married one. "All right, big guy, why don't you tell the class your story?" she said with a smile. And so I did. I gave them the Reader's Digest version of my life, glossing over the messier parts of my 17-year marriage and subsequent divorce. "Not good enough, Romeo," Ava, a striking woman with dark hair and piercing blue eyes, said from across the table. She was sitting at 8 o'clock. "If you were such a great catch, why'd your wife stray? 3 of us at this table have gone through divorces, so we need the dirt. Are you worth our time?" "Straight shooter, I like that," I replied. For the first time since my divorce 2 years prior, I told the whole, unvarnished truth, even the most painful parts. Up until this point, the only people who knew the whole story were Olivia's parents and my divorce lawyer. A heavy silence fell over the table as I finished my story. I could see tears in their eyes. Hell, I was choked up myself. "Well, that's one way to kill the mood," Jessica said, touching my arm sympathetically. "I'm so sorry, Ethan." "Hey, I try not to dwell on the past," I said, forcing a smile. "Look at the bright side. I got 2 amazing kids out of the deal, and my in-laws aren't too bad either." "You're close with your former in-laws?" Ava gasped. "You're blowing my mind. No one likes their in-laws that much, especially after a divorce." "What can I say? I'm special," I replied, grinning. "Well, if you ladies are done grilling me," I said, raising my glass. "Drinks are on me. Now it's my turn to hear your stories." We stayed for another 3 rounds, swapping stories and getting to know one another. Turns out, Ashley's ex had been a serial cheater. Ava and Jessica's marriages had ended due to what they called irreconcilable differences. Chloe had been married to the same man for 26 years. Every time she referred to him as the best husband in the world, the other 3 nodded in agreement. "That's who I need to meet," I joked. The women explained that they got together for a girls' night out once a month, so technically, I was a violation of the rules. But then Chloe piped up and said if she could bring her husband to the next one, I could come too. The others readily agreed. "Can I bring a date?" I asked boldly. A month later, the 6 of us gathered at the Oak and Barrel. I got to meet Chloe's husband, Ryan, and I had to admit, he really could have been the best husband in the world. We hit it off immediately. Our little group continued to meet for dinner every month. I became good friends with Ashley, Ava, and Jessica. Sometimes the 4 of us would get together. Sometimes I'd go on a date with one of them. Some of those dates led to sex, some to something more. They were all amazing women, and I made sure they enjoyed themselves as much as I did. Let's just say I'm a giver, and judging by their reactions, a pretty good one at that. After about a year, Ava and I became exclusive. I was still close with Ashley and Jessica, but we all understood what exclusivity meant. Though sometimes when we were all together, the banter could get a bit colorful, even for me. The kids warmed up to Ava pretty quickly. It took her parents a little longer. I understood. I wasn't in any rush. Having a steady girlfriend meant that their hopes of an Olivia and Ethan reunion were dashed, but I think they saw what I saw in Ava, someone special. And because our connection was so strong, it was only a matter of time before they felt comfortable with her and started to adore her, which is saying something. After Ava and I had been dating for about 6 months, Linda pulled me aside. She looked dead serious, and I started to worry that something was terribly wrong. "Ethan," she began, "I know I probably shouldn't say anything, but here it comes," I thought. My blissful little world is about to explode. "How long have you 2 been together now?" she continued. "Don't you think it's time you put a ring on it before someone else does?" I tried to match her serious expression, but inside, I was grinning like an idiot. My ex-mother-in-law approves. "You're right, Linda. I need to lock this one down before she comes to her senses," I said. "Honestly, I'm terrified of screwing things up." "Then you better hurry up, you big lug," she said, shaking her head. 6 weeks later, I took Ava back to Vincenzo's for her 47th birthday. I'd encouraged her to dress up for the occasion, and she didn't disappoint. She was wearing a killer little black dress that showed off her incredible figure. Ava had never wanted kids, and honestly, she looked like she was in her mid-30s. Not that she didn't work at it. The woman practically lived at the gym. I could barely keep my eyes off her all night. When the waiter brought out our cheesecake and a bottle of champagne, Ava gave me a puzzled look. "We didn't order this," she whispered. "I did," I whispered back. "This is for after I give you this." I'd gone to my jeweler after my conversation with Linda and had him design a custom engagement ring. He'd outdone himself. And apparently, so had I, because the moment Ava saw the ring, she burst into tears. I'm pretty sure there was a yes in there somewhere between the sobs. We had a simple spring wedding. Tyler was my best man, and Chloe was Ava's matron of honor. No, I didn't invite Olivia, much to George and Linda's disappointment. As far as I was concerned, my ex-wife wasn't my friend. We were only ever together when it involved the kids, and while we were cordial, I could never forget the disrespect. Some people can stay friends with their exes, but I'm not one of them. My kids eventually forgave Olivia, and I'm okay with that. She's their mother. But we don't talk about her, and they don't volunteer information. Same with George and Linda. Surprisingly, Ava and Olivia seem to get along just fine when we're all together. But Ava's her own person. She can be friends with whoever she chooses. It's not something we discuss. We've been together for Mia's wedding and then Tyler's. I was a proud father on both occasions, and nothing was going to ruin those days for my kids. A few years after they both got hitched, the grandkids started rolling in. I got to see a side of Ava I'd never expected. Turns out she had a serious case of baby fever, and her grandkids filled that void. She's a complete pushover for them. It's hilarious. Olivia remarried and then got divorced. And then she got married again and divorced again. Ava told me she thinks Olivia is looking for another version of me, but hasn't quite figured that out yet. The other night, Ava turned to me and said, "Promise me you'll never leave me." "I don't need to promise you that," I said. "I made you a vow.